can see we've got 45 people in, and very warm welcome, everybody. It's so lovely that we're doing this and so good of you to come. And a big thank you to all the speakers, of course. So this is actually our 5th Women in Psychedelics webinar. We hosted the first 4 between 2020 and 2021. So we have had a little bit of a hiatus. And Hannah and I and Drug Science are keen to do some more of these. So, people in the audience are keen to get involved in that, just let us know. So I'm Jo Neal, Professor of Psychopharmacology at the University of Manchester and Chair of the Drug Science Medical Psychedelics Working Group. Just to remind you about Drug Science, it's the UK's leading independent organisation. We're a charity and we provide education and evidence-based information about drugs for everybody. The aims of our working group, the Psychedelics Working Group, are education, so events like this one, destigmatization, again this event, research, policy, and basically enabling patients to access this medicine safely on our NHS. So just to go back to the previous Women in Psychedelics events, these were really fantastic events. And we had some of the godmothers of psychedelic science speaking, and some really wonderful and inspiring women working in this place, like Amanda Fielding, Frederica Meikle Fisher, Nicole Buchanan, Catherine Preller, Celia Morgan, Annie Mithofer. So people have been around in this field for a long, long time. And clinical psychologists, Sarah Tai and Girls Watts. So, as I said, I'm keen to kind of carry these on now. We've sort of Macy's kickstarted us. So I'm going to hand you over now to Dr. Hannah Thurger, who is going to chair this event for us. And I've known Hannah for some years now. She did her PhD at Manchester in neuroscience, looking at the role of inflammation and the extracellular matrix in repair after stroke. Not a sort of PhD for the faint-hearted, folks, so much. I mean, no PhD is for the faint-hearted, but this was an enormous amount of work. Then she went on to work for the British Neuroscience Association as an executive officer, and then she went on to work for Drug Science. So she is a senior research officer now at Drug Science. And she works across the areas of medical cannabis and medical psychedelics, two hugely important plant medicines. And she does all the work coordinating the working groups. That is an awful lot of work, folks. She coordinated the medical cannabis long COVID trial at Drug Science, which is a massive undertaking. And she's involved in lots of research projects for Drug Science. And she and I co-host the Drug Science podcast alongside David Nutt. So that's a real privilege for me. So, I'm going to hand you over to Hannah. Thank you very much indeed for chairing this, Hannah.
Oh, thank you, Jo, for such a lovely introduction. It's such a nice story of how me and Jo met all those years ago in Manchester. And Jo might be a little bit shy of me to say, but she really has become such an incredible mentor over the years. I'm so grateful to have met her in my PhD. Yeah, honestly made such a big difference. And now getting to coordinate the Medical Psychedelics Working Group with her, as well as the podcast. Always having Jo's face there when I'm a bit nervous on the podcast makes such a difference. I'm always there, to see such a friendly face. I absolutely love working with Jo. And Jo's done such a fantastic job with these webinar series, which started now, a good few years ago. I think the first one was 2019. So they're all available on our YouTube channel. I really recommend catching up on them if you have missed them. And I actually remember watching those webinars a few years ago when I first started working with Drug Science as a volunteer. And I remember just how inspiring I found them. So I'm really looking forward to today's event and hearing each of these women's different stories into working within psychedelics. So quickly, just some housekeeping notes. I'm even refamiliarising myself with the Zoom webinar So just to remind you that there's a Q&A function, so do chuck your questions in there for people, and do just make a note who the question's for. So when we do the Q&A, I know who to put the question forward to. And just a little bit about the format of the event. So each speaker will speak roughly for 15 to 20 minutes, and there'll be a Q&A after each talk, as well as a Q&A at the end as well. So in case you might not have the question come to mind straight away, you'll be able to ask it at the end of all the talks as well. So I really want to highlight that this event has been done by the wonderful Macy Web, who's a student volunteer at Drug Science, and all the speakers, all the women on the panel tonight have given up their evening to participate in this. So again, a massive thank you to everyone involved. And unfortunately, Acacia's unable to attend, but sends her apologies. And I think it's still going to be an amazing evening with the 3 women we've got lined up. So before kicking off, I want just to mention Macy and her background. So Macy is a third-year neuroscience master's student at University of Bristol, which is my hometown. So I'm obviously super biased when I say that I love Bristol and think it's a fantastic city. She's just submitted her dissertation on ibogaine as a treatment for non-suicidal self-injury. So for the past 9 months, Macy's been the education officer at Drug Science Student Society Network, and she's done a fantastic job. And has particular interest in becoming a research scientist, looking at the cellular mechanisms involved in the psychedelic experience that produce their clinical outcomes. So she's also really interested in how, as a society, we think and interact with drugs, and this has led to her passion and enthusiasm for harm reduction and education of drug use, which I can see from the work that she's done for Drug Science whilst being a student volunteer. So would you like to tell us a bit more, Macy, about the student network and what you've been involved in there?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for the introduction, Hannah. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight as well. It's so great to see so many of you here to have such engaging conversations this evening, I hope. So as you heard, my name is Macy, and I am the education officer at Drug Science for the Student Society Network. So just a bit about the Student Society Network. So it's a student-led and student-focused community that strives on trying to have engaging conversations and discussions about drugs. So the main area in which I focus on as the education officer is creating content like we are today in terms of the Women in Psychedelics webinar, also creating different types of posters or streams for Instagram as well, to just put information out there that isn't always quite as accessible as you'd think it is. So I'd also just like to say, if anyone in the audience tonight is interested in being part of the Student Society Network, then please just give us an email, or if you would like to host any of your own webinars or make your own educational content as well, we'd love to have you come along and work with us. So I'll just pop the email in the chat box, so then you can just email us at that. And yeah, if there's anything you'd like to explore with us, we're more than open to engaging with it. But I hope you all enjoy this evening. So thank you very much, Hannah.
Really, thank you so much, Macy. And the Students Network has done such a fantastic job with different types of events, helping out with social media. So if it's something that you're interested in getting involved in, I'd really recommend doing it. I don't think the society really existed when I was a student, which is a shame, because I definitely would have joined. So it's been great to see how it's evolved over the past few years. So our first panelist this evening is Joselyn Rose. So Joselyn is a psychodynamic psychotherapeutic counsellor, clinical supervisor, and EMDR practitioner with a specialist interest in EMDR as a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So she's gained her expertise from her involvement in various psychedelic clinical research trials and uses these skills in her work as an author and independent researcher, exploring the efficacy of psychedelic-assisted EMDR therapy. Joselyn also co-facilitates the Brighton Psychedelic Integration Circles and other community events. So really warm welcome to Joselyn. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your journey into the world of EMDR therapy. I know how interesting it is from hearing you talk previously. So please do go ahead and share your screen when you're ready.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Hannah, Jo, and Macy for such a warm introduction. So I want to underpin or begin by underpinning all of this by expressing my heartfelt appreciation to you, Macy, and the wonderful team at Drug Science for putting together this event and once again bringing women's issues to the forefront of psychedelic advancement. I'm going to be honest, I can't quite believe that I'm finding myself speaking at this event. I've been an attendee in previous years, and today I feel really humbled to be here alongside these other incredible women on this panel, all in celebration of women in psychedelics. So issues of diversity and inclusion are paramount in the development of any new treatment. Anti-oppressive pathways that challenge power differentials and do not alienate or exclude are integral to widening participation, improving accessibility, and enhancing our awareness of safety outcomes. And privilege blinding makes challenging the existing institutional frameworks that exist really difficult. So raising awareness of feminist issues in the field of psychedelics is just one way that we can work towards redressing this imbalance. There is a need for greater diversity and improved gender and cultural competency within the field of psychedelics. And the lack of diversity in mental health professionals, in research participants, and the lack of cultural and gender representation in treatment cohorts really does need to be challenged. So events like this and supporting events like this and working within inclusive practice help to challenge the power differentials that exist. They widen our perspective on what is achievable and what is possible. Psychedelics may lead to paradigmatic shifts in mental health provision, and working inclusively is the foundation upon which we need to build. So I really feel that this is important work. So as Hannah has already unpacked by way of introductions, it's perhaps helpful to start with just kind of what qualifies me to be here, sharing my experiences with you other than my gender identity. So yeah, I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor, EMDR practitioner and clinical supervisor. I work mostly in private practice. I also work as a psychedelic therapist on the DMT and 5-MeO DMT clinical research trials. Alongside this, I'm an independent researcher and an author with a special interest in developing trauma-responsive, scalable psychedelic treatments using tools from EMDR therapy. I'm proactive in my hometown of Brighton, so I co-facilitate Brighton psychedelic events and the Integration Circle. I also hold a diploma in psychedelic therapy from the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy, and I now work as a facilitator also at the IPT. In my local community, there's a small local women's charity, and I work as a supervisor there, supporting professionals and clinicians through applied reflective practice to help anyone in our local community with who face kind of feminist issues. And then I suppose on a personal level, and I'm going to speak quite personally today, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a beekeeper, and I've always had a keen interest in the healing properties of the natural world. So to get things going, if I can, I'm just going to share my slides with you now. So just to hold a loose overview of what I plan to speak about and to stop me going off course, it's been suggested that I cover the following content: a simple why, a what, a how, and also my hopes for the future. And in sharing my story, I hope to inspire other women to enter the field of psychedelics and give them the confidence to be active pioneers as things evolve. For me, psychedelics isn't just about mental health advancement or consciousness research. These are and continue to be issues of social justice. This is groundbreaking work, and it needs to be insight-driven, and diversity and inclusion will help us to achieve this. So fostering an inductive approach that will lead to the safest and most effective outcomes for all will only happen if we become inclusive. So this is going to be quite a personal account, which is unusual as a therapist, because normally the shoe is on the other foot. So I often have, or in my working day, I have the great privilege of hearing other people tell me their stories. But this evening, I'm going to tell you a little bit of mine. So the best stories are captured in books, and reading has been a powerfully influential part of my journey to get to this point here with you this evening. And so throughout my time with you, I'm going to illustrate my story by sharing with you some of the reading material that brought me into this line of work. So this is basically where I started. I began my postgraduate professional life teaching developmental neuroscience as a DPhil student at the University of Sussex. Circumstances changed and I took maternity leave, and thereafter I moved into teaching psychology A-level and foundation degree students at a local FE college, just in my local community, and I spent over a decade as a teacher of 16 to 19-year-olds. these are some of the textbooks that we used in the courses that I taught. And this is where I first heard about psychedelic research in the context of teaching about the dopamine hypothesis and the models for schizophrenia in applied mental health units. If only I knew then what I know now. So whilst teaching, we used to take groups of like 20 to 30 social psychology students on field trips to Krakow in Poland, and using the framework of applied social psychology, we'd take these groups to Auschwitz. This was really meaningful work. So educating young people about inequality and the social climates that lead to the power differentials relating to genocide, issues that continue to be topical today. And during one of those field trips, and around that time in my life, I was connecting to a real sort of coex of personal and collective grief. And I had one of a number of very powerful, spontaneous, non-dual, transcendental life experiences. And over the course of around 9 or 10 months, I had numerous extended sort of enlightenment-like mystical experiences. So hands down, these expanded states were some of the most powerfully transformative experience of my life. It was like a spiritual emergence or emergency. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me. I didn't even have a language to describe the profound and interconnected sort of broken beauty of those experiences. And like even now at times, connecting to them still brings me to tears. There are no words. I was later gifted this book by someone from the home education community who knew that I had an interest in psychology, equanimity, and sort of stress or trauma-induced spiritual experience. And if I were to sort of pinpoint the sort of starting point in my career to becoming a therapist, reading this book was it. So for me, Viktor Frankl's book wasn't just the reason for entering personal therapy or later training to become a therapist. It was about man's ultimate search for meaning. In all that I've done since this point, this book sort of describes the why. And of course, the why was the first of my objectives I wanted to share with you tonight. At its heart, for me, this whole journey has been a spiritual path. During this time, I did also attend various sort of shamanic and indigenous and academic events, trainings, all aimed at expanded states of consciousness. But I didn't quite kind of tap into the psychedelic stuff at this point. That came later. I also entered into a whole heap of other hippie stuff too. And by this point, I was also thirsty for reading. I got to a point in my life where I really needed a bit of a reorganizing, a recraft. And my interest in therapy, supported by my need to become the best parent that I could be, pushed me to retrain. And it kind of continues my belief that education is everything. Becoming a therapist was a bit like, it's like a bit of a crash course in parenting. And similarly, being a parent it's like a crash course in therapy, because our children, of course, are such wonderful mirrors to us. So on my journey, my wonderful children have been and continue to be my most incredible teachers. And if I learn to listen to my children, they really are the experts. Over time, I've learned that we need to let the kids teach us. So if I had to kind of sum up and pick three books about what I've kind of learned from therapeutic parenting and you know, kind of the outcomes that have led me to this point, these would be the three that I would choose. The first is the continuum concept. It's an old one. I think it's from the 1960s. And it speaks about indigenous wisdom. The middle one there, simplicity parenting, is a reminder of the importance of our connection to ourselves and to each other. And then Gabor Mate and Gordon Littfield's book has also been of, like, you know, really kind of critical value, and it unpacks the importance of attachment parenting in order to overcome adversity. So my children have been such an important part in my journey to becoming a psychedelic therapist. And when I'm supporting someone who's like really tripping hard, is lost in a regressed ego state, you know, those long days of nights, the unpredictable timings of this work, the need for unequivocal boundaries, the strong transferential material, holding a bowl for someone to vomit into, like passing tissues, supporting someone's internal battle by offering a hand to hold, or perhaps just some gentle words of encouragement. It's at these times I'm reminded of what a great honour it is to be a parent. And although I would never have known it at the time, how many of the skills of parenting ended up being transferable skills into my role as a psychedelic therapist. So what I want to underpin here is my experiences of being a mother helps me to do my job. In my work as a therapist, I have come to realise that whilst we are professionals promoting healing through right relationship, our real work is the work that we do on ourselves. Being in integrity, being in right relationship to ourselves, to others, and to the planet is integral to this. This means that we need to continue to address our own unresolved material through our mental hygiene practices and our personal therapy. Reflective practice and clinical supervision are also essential. And for me, this inner and outer work of achieving right relationship can be summed up by these 3 books. I think they work brilliantly as a triplet. And so broadly speaking, all 3 of them are about healing from the trauma of previous experience, but they sort of operate on different levels. So Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, looks at the individual level. It looks at the hidden cost of stress within the body and summarizes kind of how ill health and physical disease are caused by unprocessed trauma. The middle book here, hugely shaping in terms of my professional life, is Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And this looks at trauma sort of from the interpersonal relational level. It extends to describe sort of how trauma can become complex through developmental and relational challenges. And then the third book in this sort of triad is Risma Makarin's book, which is really kind of unpacking the collective and intergenerational trauma. And he does a brilliant job of looking at, that interconnected impact of trauma. So if we're really to heal ourselves, then we also need to heal from the collective, systemic, cultural and racialized trauma that exists. And Rishima also describes the process of annihilation if that trauma goes unresolved. So it's a really powerful read. Reading these books was also my first introduction to EMDR, which has been really powerfully influential to the way that I now practice. I'm going to come to speak about that in just a moment. So in 2015, I joined a book group in my local community. It was a non-fiction reading group, and when commitments allow, I'm still an attendee. So we read what is described as radical literature, and my fellow readers, who have now become dear friends, describe the book group as RADBOG, Radical Book Group. For anyone who would like a list of the books that we've read over the last dozen or so years, along with our Goodreads review scores, please do drop me an email. I'll be really happy to share the Google Doc with you. So a few years in, 2018, members of RADBOG selected a new release for us to read, and it was this first book here. It was Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And this was the first time that my own non-dual experiences, those spontaneous expanded states that I had experienced many years previous, those same experiences that had led me to retrain as a psychotherapist, they all started to make a bit of sense. I now had a language for what had happened to me. And given my background in developmental neuroscience and the concepts of ego dissolution and non-dual experiences, reformatted through this sort of biopsychosocial spiritual lens, really made sense for me. I was starting to weave a narrative around what had happened, or perhaps as Viktor Frankl might say, to find some meaning about those events. Now, I'm not a person with a history of substance use. For many years, I worked with young people and educated them about the risks associated with taking drugs, and Pollan's book changed my mind. My own spontaneous transcendental experiences have been, for me, unsafe, but psychedelics offered me a way back into those healing states without the need for adversity. I'd spent many years proactively exploring and integrating those spontaneous experiences. And because of this, I felt well versed in the healing potential of non-ordinary states. And more importantly, the painstaking years of integration, the hard work. I was curious about how I might integrate all of this into my therapy practice. Now, at about this time, 2018, it was also the time that psychedelic therapy research was just starting to open up. So Psychedelic 1 had recently been published. And I got involved in our community integration circle just as an attendee, and I started to take part in the events that I could, and living in Brighton, there's a fair few of them. And some of the people in the community were also very involved in the Psychedelic 2 trial at Imperial. Now, at this point, I want to introduce to you some of the barriers that women face in entering the world of psychedelics, because for me, these barriers were difficult to overcome. Whilst I don't want to lose sight of my privileges, like I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm educated, able-bodied, confident, articulate, and yeah, like those privileges, they've definitely supported me to get to where I am now. However, I do want to acknowledge that as a young parent, I was not able to take opportunities that were afforded to others who had a different set of privileges to my own. So to illustrate, I was unusually lucky. I was the only low-income single parent with 3 kids on my psychotherapy training course. And the only reason I was able to be there was because essentially I had a camper van that I could sell, and that helped me to pay for the course and the countless hours of childcare that I needed in order to attend. I was also really fortunate to be supported by means-assessed social welfare system, which I know is not available to many in other parts of the world. And these privileges and challenges need naming, and these women need a voice. And like many in this field, after years of growing up with elitism and everyday sexism, including my own hierarchies of importance and internalized sexist views, I had to work hard on myself in order to find and to justify my own voice. So in some ways, though, my biggest obstacles have also been my greatest assets. So the resourcefulness of previously being a lone parent and the responsibilities that this brings has also brought transferable skills as I move my interests forwards. So like the imposter syndrome of studying to become a therapist whilst also being an unemployed single mum with 3 young children pushed me to reach beyond my comfort zone. I've had to take risks. I've had to think strategically. And when you have no other option but to find a solution and to find a way to support yourself and your children, being adventurous and masking confidence becomes essential. So as the psychologist Vygotsky might say, if you don't feel like an imposter, then you're probably not working within your zone of proximal development. Another cap that blocks women from progressing in this field is the lack of opportunities for training and education. So since becoming a mother nearly 18 years ago, where possible, I've done my best to prioritise my children's needs and their education. I gave up my doctorate studies when I fell pregnant at the age of 22. I hold a postgraduate diploma in counselling skills, psychotherapeutic counselling, but due to affordability at the time, I did not extend this to sort of paying the extra £9,000 so that I could get the master's level. And this is a privilege cap that I feel is important to name. These opportunities are not down to ability. They are simply afforded to those in positions of privilege. I realised that up to this point, not having masters has not limited me other than my own need for academic reassurance. And I've worked hard on myself around this. I've published articles, I speak at conferences, I work in clinical research, I'm an independent researcher, and I'm writing a book. I didn't need a qualification to do what I love. However, maybe one day when my children have grown up and priorities change, I'll turn my attention back to those academic pursuits. What I do want to highlight, though, is that these social global ceilings should not get in the way of personal and professional advancement. And again, these issues disproportionately affect women and minority groups who are unable to commit the time or the money to academic achievement. So whilst I awaited further opportunities in the field of psychedelics, I did my EMDR training, and I saw that my life experiences and traumatic events offer many an alternative pathway into the healing potential of expanded states. And like psychedelics, EMDR downregulates the default mode network, increasing brain entropy, and when applied with attachment-informed and intergenerational protocols, it can support mystical experiences and spiritual emergence. So these next 2 books were hugely shaping in how I work. The first one in the middle there is Francine Shapiro's formative text on the basic principles and protocols, the procedures of EMDR therapy. It's dry, I'm not going to lie, but it is brilliant. And the other one there is Laurel Parnell's attachment-focused EMDR with adaptations for healing complex developmental and relational PTSD. Then the world changed. So for me, the COVID-19 lockdowns were a real spirit level. Before COVID, as a parent of young children, many of the CPD events and career opportunities in the field of psychedelics and EMDR therapy were not accessible to me. Then lockdown arrived and the whole world went online. And all of a sudden, I had like an access all areas pass, and I could attend all of the training, all of the networking opportunities that have been inaccessible up until that point. And I had the free time to do it as well. And so I was also like alongside the sort of the professional advancement that was possible, I was also able to connect into a wonderful community. I found my tribe. It's actually, I'm just kind of looking at the participants, and it's so nice to see that some of you are here with me tonight. We talk about meaning making. I'm sure many of you know who you are. Lockdown also changed things for me with work. So I don't know if you remember, but there was this time sort of just as the world was starting to open back up and people were returning to work, that you could sort of travel for essential business only. But at that time, if you were pinged by the NHS app because you sat within like 2 meters of someone on a train, then you had to go back into self-isolating for 10 days. I'm sure you guys can remember that. So as you can imagine, this created a staffing nightmare for those working in clinical research. And so I was employed along with a handful of other therapists to be like cover therapists on the DMT for depression phase 2A clinical trial. And this was just in case like members of the therapy team got pinged by the NHS app and had to self-isolate, which of course they did. And so it was the first time anywhere in the world that DMT had been used in a clinical cohort. And by some weird twist of fate, I found myself exactly where I wanted to be, working as a psychedelic therapist. And that trial snowballed into like a phase 2B and then out into other branches. And so about this time, the IPT, the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy, kind of was conceptualized, conceived, inaugurated, and I began facilitating events with the IPT, and then later went on to study with them in their 2-year diploma in psychedelic assisted therapy, which finished in December 23. I also started working on the phase 2A for treatment-resistant depression using 5-MeO DMT. And again, it's a kind of a world first in a clinical population. So if we go all the way back to the beginning to think about the objectives of what I wanted to speak to in terms of what I'm currently doing, this kind of summarizes the what. And I really hope that I'm able to remain in this absolute sweet spot of clinical advancement. It's such incredible work. I do want to, however, jump in with another barrier to access. And I can see that whilst I'm now generally well paid for what I do, much of the work and many of the opportunities that have arisen to me have come about because of my ability and willingness to give my time free of charge. Again, this is a position of privilege and prevents access to those on lower wages, and it adversely affects women more than men. Women and parents, ethnic minority groups, we have so much to offer the field of psychedelics, and pathways need to exist to support their access if we're to tap into all that people have to offer. So, making sense of my own spontaneous transcendental experiences has and probably will always be an ongoing process. Reading has been a big part of integrating that. Writing has come to be too. Meditation. These 3 books are a great place to start. I really I got a lot from After the Ecstasy, The Laundry. Jack Cornfield's book was hugely validating in terms of the crossover between meditation, spiritual practice, psychedelics, and traumatic experience. More recently, Tim Reed and Maria Papaspiro, they're dear friends and colleagues, and have come to mean a lot to me. They've published this wonderful overview, compiling expertise from across the field. Some incredible contributors to psychedelics and psychotherapy. And more recently, Mark Alaxia's book on the harm reduction initiatives that have been going on in Barcelona is also a wonderful overview and a practical guide that was more recently published. So If I'm talking about recent reading, I can't not mention the study protocols, because I've been digging through these documents for countless hours since I started working on the trials in early 2021. Now, because of the sensitive nature of the content of these documents and because of the need for data integrity, I'm not able to speak too much about my work on the clinical trials. But if I'm telling my story through my reading journey, then I need to include something about study protocols, because, there's just as a lot of hours have gone into tracing these lines of text. And so these are some of the freely available online examples. I also want to mention one of my hobbies, so I think it's kind of important to this last section. So I've been keeping bees since 2011. I love ecology and I'm fascinated by the healing properties of the natural world. This book, Buzz in the Meadow, paints a picture of the need for holistic thinking as we move forwards and towards ecologically healing outcomes. It's a really beautiful book of his experiences of rewilding his property in France, and the impact that this process has not just on bee populations, but also on the whole ecosystem. And I see the importance of holistic healing in my work as a psychedelic therapist. We can't possibly treat the individual unless we look at the holistic and systemic needs. The middle book here, The Shamanic Way of the Bee, it's another gem, looking from an ancestral kind of wisdom, and it also really unpacks the importance and beauty of ritual, and I really love this book. And then finally, The Buzz About Bees. This one's great. It's all about like collective intelligence of superorganisms. So for kind of context, honeybees, I'm getting excited now because I'm talking about bees. Honeybees evolved into their current feminist society around 30 million years ago. So for context, so humans have only been bipedal for like 2 million years. So bees have a hive mind, a collective consciousness. They don't exist without the collaboration of all members of that superorganism. It's like a society or an individual in many bodies. And I see there's an application here in the field of traumatology and psychedelics. So psychedelic drugs will become legal. In some cases, it's already happening. And I see that our greatest challenge now is one of scalability. So how do we make these treatments available to the people who need them most? And if we're going to solve this next sort of piece in this puzzle, we're going to need a hive mind. And in terms of that hive mind, collaboration is the stuff of growth. And when we work together, we become greater than the sum of the parts. And so the last slide that I have is one all about collaboration. And so collaboration is knotted into my hopes for the future. And so here I've got one final book to mention, and this time it's my own. I've been collaborating with a colleague and dear friend, Hannah Smith. Hannah is one of the smartest and hardest working people that I have met. And this year, our book, Psychedelic Assisted EMDR Therapy, Memory Consolidation Approach to Psychedelic Healing, is due to be published by Routledge. And herein, we unpack more on like how to work with this evidence-based trauma therapy in the emergent field of psychedelics. So the EMDR toolkit fits well into psychedelic therapy and widening participation. So to kind of sum up, I never thought that I would read many books. Reading's quite hard work for me, let alone write one. Writing has reformed my thinking and changed who I am as a person. I've come to learn that experts don't write books. It is the process of writing that develops our expertise. And we need women and other minorities to be represented in the literature in a way that they currently aren't. And to end with one final hope for the future, but also for today, I hope that in sharing my story with others, I may inspire some of you to have a go yourself. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I've got two things. One is to answer any questions that you might have, but also a request that if anyone has any gems of a recommendation for reading, please do put them in the chat. I'm always up for a good book.
Oh, thank you so much, Joss, for sharing your story. That was absolutely incredible. So Joss joined and presented to our medical psychedelics working group a few months ago. And that served as a reminder that when someone presents, you don't ever get to hear their story. And I love it at conferences where someone puts up a slide and they tell you about their journey and their different career paths, because it's actually never what you expect. Everyone has bumps along the ways, or in the way you showed it through the books, and each book kind of signifying a transition period or different thought process. That was really, really lovely way to present your story. So thank you so much for sharing it that way. And I had no idea that that was your career path, coming from initially undergraduate and then going into being a teacher and then therapy. So thank you so much. And you've got lots of questions that have come through. Are you happy for me just to kick off with one of the questions that have come in? So here we go. Because there's some great questions. I'm going to start with the question from Poppy, which was great talk. I was just wondering if there are any clinical trials using EMDR therapy alongside psychedelics, and then I might break down some other questions as well. But just to start off with that one, because I think that's a really relevant question.
Yeah, it is a good question, and it kind of it shines a light on a broader problem in terms of psychedelic therapy research. So it's a broader problem, and that is because at the moment all of the drugs that get all of the trials that get approval are focused on drug safety and efficacy. And that's for a good reason, because we're still in sort of phase 2A. So we're still a long way off of looking at therapeutic efficacy. And therapeutic efficacy without psychedelics is really hard to achieve. And that's why there's very few therapies that are actually commissioned by healthcare commissioners, because it's really hard to look at therapeutic efficacy. In fact, I think that the NICE guidelines here in the UK have pretty much only approved 2 treatments for PTSD. One is CBT and one is EMDR. And so all of those other kind of, therapies are not currently commissionable or usable. And so if I backtrack a little bit to the question that was asked, at the moment, we're not really able to put it into a trial setting, because it costs like £1 million to run an RCT. At the moment, the only people who have got that kind of funding are pharmaceutical companies. And so what we're doing in terms of what we're offering to the kind of the community through what we're writing is what's informed by what's called a pracademic approach. And so it's what we find in our own EMDR practice, what we have worked on in legal retreat settings, what we've done in terms of like self-experimentation, the conceptual framework for it. So also kind of looking at people perhaps who have inadvertently had psychedelic experiences, like, for example, people who may have had intensive care experiences on ketamine that they trying to integrate, or and so we're kind of like it's a grassroots, bottom up, or inductive reasoning approach. And this is quite difficult because it's kind of, you need to, in order to have or build an evidence base, you have to have an evidence base to build upon it. It's a bit of a kind of chicken and egg thing. You can't just jump in with an RCT if you don't have any foundations upon which to build. And so by putting out a conceptual framework, doing case studies, some of the other sort of measures that I've described, we can start laying out the groundwork for those conceptual experiments. And then hopefully in due course, when the psychedelic field really opens up and these treatments are available to more people, then we can start looking at which ones are the most effective. And this also kind of comes, sorry, I'll keep going until someone stops me. It also comes at a point in kind of healthcare reform where we're moving away from kind of medicalized understandings of kind of disorders to more kind of transdiagnostic frameworks of like not what you have, but what happened to you. And so, we are kind of moving towards more trauma-focused treatment. The other thing I want to sort of say as well is, if there's anyone in the audience who might be able to support us to bring EMDR into an RCT or anything like that, please do get in contact, because that's something we are also looking at trying to pilot. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation to kind of help people understand kind of where we're at with the way that clinical trials are designed at the moment, and how we can hope that they might be able to progress, or these are types of conversations that still need to be happening now, even though we might not be able to do them in a trial setting, that when it's then rolled out and we're ready. So these, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on. I was just going to add that it is already rolling out. So my colleague Hannah and I are collaborating with clinicians based in Australia, and trying to support them with the expertise that we have built to offer some of these treatments using EMDR. So yeah, we've got some connections over there.
And you know how much we love real world evidence at Drug Science. Do you know if they're going to be collecting any data in Australia?
To be continued. I don't know yet. Yeah,
Fingers crossed, because that would be great.
Yeah. I think case studies is probably the start.
Great,
yeah.
No, that sounds good. And these two questions that follow on from Poppy, a bit more about your personal journey. So of course it's up to you how much you want to divulge. But the question is just, is there a lot of support from your loved ones surrounding your work, or do you face any stigma with what you do? And if it's not too personal, has your field work helped you to find tools that support your dyslexia?
I've come to be. I'll answer the second one first. I've come to be kind of quite appreciative of my slightly dyslexic brain, because I noticed that I link ideas in different ways to kind of I guess kind of neurotypical people. I also when I write, I kind of write in circles. I don't know how to describe it, so I'll put all my ideas down, and then I'll go through a sort of painstaking, like trying to make it make sense and reorder it. So I'm not someone who kind of writes from start to finish. But yeah, kind of linking ideas, I think has ended up being quite useful. I think, that kind of creativity. And in terms of loved ones, yes, hugely supportive. Really, it was a bit of a process. I kind of see it as like an uncloseting. I felt like I was kind of interested in first spirituality, and then kind of unfolding it out into psychedelics, and I suppose it took a bit of a kind of a confidence leap to uncloset, or to feel confident in bringing that part of myself into my professional life and into my now it feels far more mainstream than it did.
Yeah, and I think I've heard kind of similar analogies with researchers and therapists. I think even just in the past kind of couple of years or 3 years or so, times are definitely changing. So I think one more question. So I know that you've been able to publish on your work. And so the question is, how have you managed to get recognised and publish papers when typically people who publish papers tend to have a master's or a PhD?
I think that this is where the kind of the resourcefulness of being a kind of a lone parent. I mean, those are old skills. I'm now in a really supportive relationship, so I have plenty of support around me. But those skills, once they've been adopted, they don't go anywhere. And so giving it a go, being perhaps like a little bit kind of risk taking, or being confident to go up and ask for conversations with people who may be better placed than we are, and also surrounding myself with people who are far smarter than I am, and that's also kind of and that is and continues to be such a gift, is collaboration, community. We all bring different skills, and I think that that really kind of underpins the importance of diversity in this work.
Definitely. And it was so lovely to see you present alongside Hannah. I think it's a really nice way to see two people come together. And you can see even when you're presenting like different approaches to your work as well, and how you can complement each other. It's a really refreshing way to literally see teamwork happening on screen during presentation. Thank you so much for joining us and giving up
Thank
your
you.
evening, Joselyn. I know you have to go now, unfortunately, but
I will
people
stay on the
are-
chat.
you're going to stay on the chat and you're going to try and answer questions. So please, feel free to put more questions in the Q&A for Joselyn whilst there's other presenters speaking. But thank you very much again. And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure I'll see you again soon.
No doubt. Thanks, Hannah.
Take care,
Thank you
bye.
all. Bye for now.
Up next, we have Dasha Anderson. Hi, Dasha. So Dasha is a current PhD student helping pioneer the current research of psychedelics, working with Professor Emma Robinson at the University of Bristol, researching the psychopharmacology of psychedelics. So a bit of a fun fact about Professor Emma Robinson, that she was a PhD student of Professor David Nutt's. Yeah, that's right. You're nodding your head, which is good. I just wanted to fact check myself. So that's a nice story again about someone progressing from a PhD student working with Dave all the way up now to being a PhD student, a professor supervising PhD students. So Dasha, really warm welcome.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Being told I'm pioneering something is very exciting, so thank you. Cool. So I'm Dasha. I'm a PhD student based at Bristol University. I'm researching psychedelics using preclinical studies. I just want to start by saying thank you so much to Drug Science for having me come to this panel. It's very exciting, a little bit intimidating being on this panel with like insanely amazing sort of pioneers in psychedelic research who are also women. So super excited to be here. And of course to Macy for asking me to join. So that was really nice. So I'm going to kind of give a bit of an overview of my journey into psychedelic research. This is kind of targeted, hopefully, to people in the audience who might be interested in kind of going into psychedelic research themselves and kind of hearing about an early career researcher who's kind of just done it, and kind of it's all quite new to me. So hopefully I can kind of share a bit of wisdom. You might be able to see from the title, I've said it's a 10-year journey. Maybe that's an overstatement. But the reason I've kind of gone for 10 years is because I think the first time I kind of really thought about drug research or drug policy in any kind of deeper way was probably at the age of around 16 as a teenager, listening to metal music, trying to annoy my parents. I was listening to bands like System of a Down and Rage Against the Machine, and I heard a song called Prison Song by System of a Down. And it kind of goes into the sort of the war on drugs and mass incarceration in the US and the kind of racialized state of drug policy in the US. And it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that drug policy isn't just an issue that affects drug users, it's an issue that affects all of society and kind of the way that we relate to each other. And it just kind of sparked this interest in me. And I guess it's kind of a way of showing how music can also be super influential in kind of opening people's eyes to drug policy and just policy in general. But skip 2 years ahead, I decided to do a psychology degree at Durham, and I specialized in cognitive neuroscience. I was really interested in kind of how the brain works, how the mind works, also how drugs kind of affect the brain. So I specialized in cognitive neuroscience. I learned a bit about techniques like EEG and fMRI, but I think the kind of the first point at which I can really remember academically becoming interested in drug research and drug policy was in my third year when I took a module it was a sociology module, and it was taught by Professor Fiona Measham, who is a sociologist based at Durham before. I think she's now at Liverpool. And she did this drugs, crime and society module, which kind of went into things like the epidemiology of drug use, social factors in drug use, like sorry, my light keeps turning off for some reason. I'm just going to have to have that as it is. She was talking about how drug use can be kind of embodied, how people can be trying to, or can sort of present aspects of themselves or their personality or their social status by how they're using drugs. And I also learned about sort of approaches to drug education, whether or not we should be taking an approach which just don't do drugs, or whether or not we should be trying to create a discussion around drug use. And I kind of came to the opinion that I believe that people are going to take drugs. I mean, whether or not you tell them not to or not, it's going to happen. And I think that the best thing we can do is ensure that people have as much information available to them as possible so that they can make an informed decision about their drug use. And I think that will put people in a much better position, in a safer position in the future. I also think it's very important that we try and break down any stigma that's associated with drug use, because, well, I mean, obviously I come at this from like a student perspective, but hearing that students, for instance, are scared to sort of reach out to emergency services or their university if they're either in like an emergency situation in terms of drug use, or if they're maybe having a more personal long-term issue with drug use, these are the kinds of things that are just really baffling to me. And I guess this is, again, another reason why I sort of became very interested in drug policy. And also I learned a little bit about like the history of drug criminalization, and learning that that's not necessarily evidence-based. A lot of the time it's based on kind of moral panics and racism and kind of, yeah, systemic oppression. So that kind of spurred my interest. And because of this, I decided to join Students for Sensible Drug Policy, which was kind of a student group that tried to advocate for more evidence-based drug policies, and also for better education of students and harm reduction initiatives. And that was started by my friend Esty Orion. And then also I was lucky enough in that summer to then volunteer with the charity that was run by Fiona Measham, which provides drug checking services at festivals. So what I did is I was basically walking around these festivals with an iPad and asking people what sort of drugs are they taking, like how are they taking them, if they've ever had any kind of negative experiences with drugs, that sort of thing, to sort of get an overview of drug use patterns at festivals. And importantly, the Loop also provided or provides harm reduction intervention, so that when people give their drugs over to check the contents of their drugs, they're also getting a kind of an intervention at that point, which asks them, do you know what might be the negative effects of these drugs? Do you know how to keep yourself safer? So giving some kind of tailored advice about how to make the drug use less dangerous. So after that, I decided, so this was at the end of my third year, I then decided I wanted to stay on in Durham for another year, and decided to do a MSc in cognitive neuroscience. And I also took over as the president of SSDP at Durham. And kind of at this time, most of what I was trying to do was to influence university drug policy. One thing I was able to do at the time then was to raise the funds to be able to introduce free drug testing kits from the student union. So that was very exciting. But then you'll probably see 2020 was a very important year in the world, and overlapped with, of course, the COVID pandemic, which kind of just put a pause on all of the kind of initiatives that I was trying to do. A lot of it was like in person, so sort of doing like education sessions, doing training sessions. So a lot of that had to be put on pause. And I was also in the middle of my MSc dissertation, which was originally meant to be very neuroscience heavy. So I was doing a project with Dr. Alison Lane looking at subconcussive head injury. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to go into the lab or to meet patients to collect the data that I needed. So I was kind of put in a bit of a difficult situation. But what I wanted to do was really just try and make the most of a bad situation. So I contacted Professor Adam Winstock, who was based at UCL, and he's also the brains behind the Global Drug Survey, which is the largest survey of drug use in the world. And I went to Adam and kind of begged him to let me use some of the data. I really wanted to do a project at that time on medical psychedelics, because I'd been going to a few talks by David Nutt and Ros Watkins, and was learning about the kind of resurgence of medical research into psychedelics, but he had some medical cannabis data that he wanted me to analyze, and I was very happy to do that, because I was just interested really in how drugs that are currently criminalized might be actually used for therapeutic purposes. And it kind of dawned on me that it was just insane how we have all this evidence potentially that drugs like psilocybin could be really revolutionary to mental health, and yet we're still treating them in legally as if they have absolutely no medical benefit. So my MSc dissertation was then looking at comparing the demographic and drug use characteristics of people who use cannabis in a way that they describe as recreational or medical, and then also looking at the different medical conditions are most likely to be treated with medical cannabis. So, for instance, sleep, psychiatric conditions, and chronic pain. So as I said, we were still in the midst of coronavirus. I had a lot of spare time, and I funneled a lot of that energy into my work with SSDP. I got in touch with Rasheen Downs, who was the head of the international branch of SSDP. And together we tried to relaunch Students for Sensible Drug Policy UK, so create a network of UK chapters of SSDP. And this kind of came at quite a poignant time because obviously we were in the middle of COVID, and what we were finding was that a lot of the way that people was using drugs was starting to change. You know, drug use became a lot more, was happening a lot more at home. So people were kind of away from being able to access maybe emergency services if necessary. A lot of drug use was happening less in like clubs and bars where there might be people on site there to help in medical emergencies, to becoming a lot more hidden away at home. So we were seeing this change in drug use patterns in students. And also there was a string of, unfortunately, drug overdoses among students in the Northeast at the time. And it kind of really just highlighted how important it was that we really needed to change in terms of drug policy at universities and improving drug education and improving harm reduction initiatives. So while I was at SSDP UK, a lot of what we were doing was things like having awareness campaigns. So we ran campaigns for the Opioid Awareness Day. We also collaborated with Neurosite to run a survey on drug use, on the effect of COVID on drug use and mental health in students. And we also joined the advisory group for the NUS's kind of new drug and alcohol accreditation scheme. And we also ran a side event at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in 2021 on the effect of COVID on student drug use. So we were really focused on advocating for improved university drug policies. And it was also at this time that we started working with drug science. So we collaborated with the Drug Science Student Society to run the inaugural Student Psychedelic Conference. And it was this time that I sort of came to be aware of drug science, and I met Jo Neal, and we worked a bit together on some, collaborated on some university harm reduction initiatives. So this then gets me to the end of my degree. I started to think about what am I going to do next. I kind of toyed with the idea of maybe going and doing postgrad medicine and sort of becoming maybe psychiatrist, something like that. I also thought about maybe just going straight into drug policy. But eventually I kind of settled on the idea of I wanted to do a PhD in neuroscience. I wanted to become a neuroscientist. So with that, I applied for several kind of generic PhD programs in neuroscience and got rejected from all of them, and realized that maybe now is the point to try and get some real world experience in neuroscience research. So I went to London and I joined the Centre for the Developing Brain at King's, and I joined them as a research assistant working on fMRI projects, basically looking at brain development. But while I was there, I couldn't help this feeling that really what I wanted to be doing was working on psychedelic research. So I got in touch with Jo Neal, who I knew was the chair of the medical psychedelics working group, and asked her if she knew of any opportunities. And she asked me if I'd heard of Emma Robinson, and basically found out about this project, which is a BBSRC funded project as part of the Southwest Bio program, investigating the psychopharmacology of the psychedelic psilocybin. So just for the final few minutes of my talk, I'm just going to give a quick overview of my project. So my PhD project is essentially trying to develop translational methods for studying the psychopharmacology of psilocybin. So psilocybin is the active ingredient of magic mushrooms, and it's shown some rapid and sustained antidepressant effects in clinical trials, which is quite in contrast to kind of the more traditional antidepressant treatments that are available at the moment, which can take several weeks to start working, and also patients have to take them every day, which can lead to unpleasant side effects. So obviously clinical trials done in humans, why am I talking about translational methods in animals? So human trials are obviously extremely important in order to understand efficacy, but in terms of trying to understand the exact mechanisms by which antidepressants might be having their effects at like a neurobiological level, we have some limitations. First of all, it's really hard to do fully blinded trials in humans because obviously the psychedelics have a very strong psychological effect, which is hard to hide from patients. But also we're kind of limited in what we can do ethically and practically in order to sort of get at the exact maybe cellular or molecular mechanisms that might be underlying psilocybin's effects. So this is where kind of animal studies come in. They're a lot more controlled. We can also test the same animal multiple times, and we can use sort of sophisticated methods to try and understand how these drugs are working at a more neurobiological level. And ultimately, the most important thing about animal studies is that we can infer causality. So we can say, if we think maybe this receptor is really important, or this brain region, we can actually test that scientifically. So then with all of that information, we can then improve the safety and efficacy of treatments that we already have. So say like psilocybin, and we can also screen for new treatments. So say if we find that there's a certain molecular target that we think might be really important for underlying psilocybin's antidepressant effects, we could then potentially develop new treatments that also target that same mechanism, but maybe has less side effects or is more effective or quicker, et cetera, et cetera. But like all things, animal studies, of course, have their limitations too. Mainly in the fact that animal studies can only produce findings that are useful to patients if they employ translational methods. So what do I mean by a translational method? So kind of in the same way as translating between languages, when we're doing studies in animals, we want to make sure that we can translate between rodents and humans. We want to make sure that the behaviors and kind of measures that we're taking in rodents in order to understand depression or antidepressants is relevant to the sorts of measures and behaviors that we're testing in humans with depression. Now, obviously, translation in the context of trying to understand how psychedelics might be helpful for depression if it faces you with two things that are incredibly and inherently human, which is a psychedelic experience and depression. I mean, we can't ask a rodent how it's thinking or how it's feeling. And I mean, psychedelic experiences are hard to explain by humans at the best of times, let alone an animal. And similarly, there's a lot of contention about, could an animal even have a depression? Like, what does that mean? But fortunately, there are many behaviors that are evolutionarily conserved. So in my lab, one example is emotional bias. So we know in people with depression that often they show increased attentional bias, or they're more likely to attend to stimuli in the environment that are negative rather than positive. They're also more likely to remember stimuli that are negative rather than positive. And if they're presented with a neutral looking face, they'll be more likely to interpret that as being negative. So these are the kinds of things that we can measure objectively in emotion recognition tests in humans. And luckily, we have similar types of tests that we can also run in rodents. Another possible behavioral marker that we can look at is cognitive flexibility. So recently in psychedelic research, there's been this idea that potentially the way that psychedelics might be having their therapeutic effect is by breaking people out of rigid thought patterns that are inherent to psychiatric conditions. So this is true of depression, but it could also be true of various other psychiatric conditions like anxiety or addiction or anorexia. But in the context of depression, it would be those fixating on sort of negative self-referential thoughts. Maybe what psychedelics are doing is by having this intense psychological experience, you're able to sort of break out of those rigid thought patterns and think about things in a new way. And obviously that sounds quite philosophical and abstract, but we're sort of trying to develop tasks that we can run in the lab that also allow us to measure these kinds of things. So for instance, the reversal learning task, essentially what you do is you present a person with two pictures. If they choose one of the pictures, they get deducted money. If you choose the other one, then they get given money, like a reward. They're not told which one is rewarded and which one isn't rewarded. They just kind of have to learn that over time based on feedback. But at a certain point, the stimulus that was being rewarded now stops being rewarded, and the one that was not being rewarded now becomes rewarded. And essentially, we're just trying to see how quickly people can kind of get to grips with these changing rewards and reward contingencies. And there's a really similar version of this task that we can also run in mice and rats, where they're basically in a touch screen and they can press different pictures. And rather than giving them money because they don't understand what that means, we can give them sugar pellet rewards. So we have these different tasks that are really useful for translating behavior between rodents and humans when we're trying to study depression. And then the benefit of this is that we can then combine these with sophisticated neuroscience techniques. So for instance, you can use genetically modified lines, which you say if you think that a certain receptor might be important in the effect of psilocybin, you can knock down that receptor and then see how that affects behavior in these tasks. You can also do in vivo recording of brain activity or targeted infusions of your drug into the region that you think might be involved. But yeah, so that's kind of a whole whistle-stop tour of my research. Again, sorry that the light is turned off. I'm going to go and run and switch back on again in a sec. But I just want to say that I hope that you've noticed kind of throughout my talk that like there have been so many incredible women, inspirational women that have really helped me and mentored me and guided me along this journey. And I couldn't say that I'd be in the position in my career where I am without them. You know, Professor Emma Robinson, obviously my supervisor, Jo or her help, Rasheen Downs from SSDP, Alison Lane, my MSc supervisor, Fiona Measham, who kind of inspired my interest in drug policy in the first place. And I also want to say that my journey from having that light bulb moment when I was 16 to now, it hasn't been linear. I didn't know what I wanted to do for a while, and it took me kind of trying a few different things to realize that it was actually neuroscience, the neuroscience of psychedelics, that was what I was most interested in. And I faced challenges. I mean, I got rejected from a few PhDs. COVID happened, so there's been challenges and setbacks, but it's just been lovely to have the opportunities that I have had to work on different projects in psychedelic research and drug policy more generally. And I'm still committed to, and I would like to advocate for the importance of evidence-based policies that prioritize health and human rights. And that's kind of my whole approach to this all. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dasha. I think it's really valuable for lots of students listening in just to see the career journey and to understand how all those different types of volunteering experience that you did along the way with SSDP and with the Loop, how they've all kind of fed into you working out exactly what it is that you want to do, provided you with different skill sets, which you've then been able to apply at later stages. And it was so nice to hear you shine the light on all the women, like lots of us, we come across incredible women in our careers who really do have such a massive impact on providing you with guidance, with support, sometimes just a listening ear. And sometimes that really is what you need if you're in difficult situations. So I think that was really nice just to kind of emphasize that across your journey. So there's some questions that have come in which are really suited to your specific experience. I'm going to kick off with one of the first ones. Let me just open them back again. And so this is a question that I often get, is that people ask me, I want to get research experience before a PhD. I want to try and get a research assistant role, but how do I go about getting one? So if you've got any tips for what people could try and do when they're applying for these types of roles.
Yeah, so I did my first sort of research assistant position was actually just in my second year. I just approached an academic and just asked if they had any data that they wanted me to analyze or if there was just anything I could help with. So actually, as Jos was saying, that unfortunately in this world, or especially in the academic world, often you have to do things for free to get ahead. And that's what I found, is that I had to do a couple of free sort of research internships, but then I was lucky in my second year that I was able to get a research bursary to run a summer project, which is when I was doing EEG research. And I should also mention that all of these, because I think I sometimes get the question of like, did you do psychedelic research like from the beginning? Like, did you do drug research from the beginning? Like, absolutely not. Like, my dissertation in my undergrad was on game theory psychology. So like, it's never too late. Like, I didn't really do any drug research until my master's. And even by that point, it was completely a fluke. It was just because COVID happened that I was able to do that. So yeah, I think as much experience you can get voluntary, obviously taking into account how much time you have, like don't overwork yourself. But it's always useful to have like a bit of experience so that when you then go to apply for paid roles, they'll see that you've done the similar thing in the past.
Definitely, that's really good experience. And for some people listening in, just to flag, there are schemes out there as well for summer placements. So I know Into Science, for example, I know that some specific institutes, such as the Crick Institute, also offer summer placements. And I think some of these will sometimes provide you with as well. So always keep an eye out for those specific programs that will be advertised throughout the year if you are looking to try and get some hands-on research experience, because it really, like you said, does make a big difference when you're applying. And again, I really resonate. I didn't start off working in drugs. I started off working in stroke and in
I was thinking of you when I said that. Yeah.
So definitely don't be put off if you're still looking for a way in. Skills are so transferable. We've got Joe coming on as well.
Sorry, yes, I don't want to interrupt. The BAP offer internships,
Yeah.
the British Association for Psychopharmacology. So that's exactly the sort of organisation that Emma Robinson and actually Dave Nutt are involved with. So that I guess the Pharmacological Society does as well. And so many of the BNA, do they offer?
I was just about to say that, but I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. So the BNA, they do have a really great initiative called the BNA Scholars Programme, which is for underrepresented groups in neuroscience. Although that doesn't have a specific component for like a research experience, it does offer loads of other benefits in terms of mentoring. So you get matched up with a specific mentor, as well as networking opportunities and career events. So again, if you're a neuroscience student, particularly if you're a final year or master's, PhD, do check that out, because it's a really, really, really good program. Again, I'm biased because I worked for the BNA, but a fantastic organisation. So sometimes it's just really finding out about these types of programs through word of mouth, through events like this, and seeing what's out there and just trying to keep on top of them.
Like you were saying about mentorship, like I was really lucky. SSDP ran a psychedelic mentorship scheme, which I think is still running. So they basically pair you with someone that works in psychedelic research and something that you're interested in, and then you can get like one-to-one advice about how to get into the field and that kind of thing. So that's another opportunity as well.
So you kind of answered next question,
Okay.
but actually I want to see whether you've got anything else. Then what are the main things that you've learned from helping establish SSDP in the UK? So I guess you talked about a benefit there of the mentorship, but what are some of the main things that you'd say you learned in that process?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like there are a few different ways I could answer it. So I guess in terms of like employability or whatever that means, I mean, it's been really helpful for allowing me to, I've done a lot of work like writing up reports. We did one report talking about, it was basically a document about how drug checking works, like drug checking tests at universities. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What's the legal status for universities? So that was a big piece of work. So that got me some really good experience in like report writing and research. I got very good experience with working with stakeholders. So I worked with Neurosite, with the NUS. So that's been super beneficial. I've also had the opportunity of either running or being involved with, and when you kind of run a training session, you end up learning yourself.
Yeah.
Running training sessions on like harm reduction. So what are the strategies people can put in place to keep themselves safe if they do decide to do drugs? Well, not safe, but safer if they do decide to do drugs. So it's just been, I've just learned, I can't even like put my finger on it. I've learned so much that beyond, like I would say that I learned less about like the neuroscience of drugs, more so than just like how to be a good researcher, how to be to work independently, how to work with others. I also learned a lot about, I guess, social issues that I wouldn't have otherwise known about. I mean, I would say I am in a position of privilege as well, you know, white, middle class, etc. And you learn about social issues you wouldn't have otherwise maybe heard about you know, sex workers or people who intravenously inject drugs. That all of these different groups experience their own challenges when it comes to drug use. So yeah, no, it's probably one of the best experiences I've done.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted something really important, that sometimes when you're a scientist, you can become so locked in, especially for PhD, to looking at a very specific niche area, that sometimes you forget about the wider societal implications of why you're doing your research or actually what's happening in the real world. And I think to keep yourself a well-rounded scientist and to keep that awareness, it is really important to actually understand the impact of what your research is going to have on society, or how it's impacting society currently. And so I'm going to ask the question that's always annoying when you're studying your PhD and people always ask you, what's next? Or what would you no. Because sometimes, you know, I'm just going to finish the PhD. I haven't completely thought about what's next, but do you know what's next for you?
So I would say honestly, no. I mean, I love research. Like if I could stay here and just do this for the rest of my life, I'd be pretty happy. So that would be really cool. or I'd be interested in kind of, because originally my thought process behind doing a PhD in neuroscience was, when I was almost still drug policy focused, I was like, well, if I get a PhD in this, then no one can argue with me. That was kind of my approach. And maybe I'll end up going back into doing either health policy or drug policy or something like that. I mean, I realize now that people can argue me and definitely will argue with me. But yeah, so I'd be happy to do either like stay in research. I mean, sometimes I find it, as you say, you can get so focused on one thing that it's nice to kind of get out sometimes, but
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. It's already been a great career progression. So I'm sure you're going to keep in touch with drug science anyway, whether it's coming to one day present your results, your thesis or paper or an event. So we'll see you again. Thank you so much, Dasha. Thank you. Perfect. And so we're now on to the final speaker. So the final speaker today is Aquea Offic. So if Aquea wants just to come on the screen, yes, perfect. Camera's on, that's great. So Aquea turned to healing, alternative healing modalities when traditional medicine failed. So Aquea immersed herself in African spirituality and psychedelic medicine, which supported her and her son in healing. She now helps others who are dealing with coercive control and grooming by publicly speaking about psychedelic plants or compounds' potential. So Aquea is the founder of African Spiritual Practices Events and is the co-founder of Hub and Culture, whilst working as a full-time dressmaker. So really warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to take part in this. It wasn't something I was expecting at all. So, yeah, I'm super, super thrilled. And my own journey into psychedelics, now I'm back in Ghana. So I should just say I'm actually back in Ghana properly for the first time in 8 years. And it feels like, in a way, my journey began 8 years ago when I had to leave Ghana, because I'd moved to Ghana 5 years before with my young son, which was something I wanted to do as soon as I went through the scan and I was told that my baby was going to be a boy. I just made the decision straight away that I didn't want to bring up a black boy in the UK. And I was lucky enough that when he was 8 years old, we were able to move to Ghana. But 5 years in, my mother became ill and needed an operation. And we thought, we're going back for 3 months while she recovers. Unfortunately, the operation went wrong. We had to stay. I had to give up my businesses and my home in Ghana. And it was a really difficult time. I became quite depressed, but I don't think I realized at the time at all. And my son was at secondary school. He started in the second year. I know they've got a different way of doing it, but I was born in 1969. I can never remember the years. So for me, it's the second year of secondary school. And he was groomed into what they call county lines drug dealing, where children are made to go to other counties to sell drugs. It can be for a day, 2 days, 4 days, sometimes even up to 2 weeks. And then they're brought back to whatever city they're from. And for us, it was London. At the time when the first time he was arrested, it was such a shock. Just because in our family, I mean, nobody had ever been to prison in the UK, and we'd been in the UK, I would say, as a family coming up to 50 years at the time. And it was just a shock. And everyone was brilliant. We're from a very large family. Everybody came in to help. And very quickly, what became obvious was this was not something a whole group of aunties and uncles talking to him could cure. And it was such a shock to go from having a child who was passing everything in terms of academic work, even when we came to the UK, within the first 2 weeks, they moved him up a year in English. He won the school speech prize. so to less than a year later to have this happening was just, I think it was too much for my brain. And I think everything for me closed down and I could manage going to work. We'd started Hub and Culture by then. We had a shop in Peckham. I could do that, but I would come home and just sit there. And if I wasn't just sitting there, then I would just be eating. And at some point, I remember going on to Google and probably YouTube, actually, and I put in how to get over procrastination fast, because I still hadn't really registered that I was depressed and not able to really cope with the situation. And the first thing that I came across was faster EFT, emotional freedom technique. But there was another technique, which is now called eutactics. It's still tapping, but it worked faster. And that started to break this sort of freeze mode that I was in. So I think once I discovered that, I was just kind of like, okay, what other modalities are there? Very quickly, I came across ayahuasca. But at that time of my life, I knew nobody who could get hold of anything other than marijuana. And so I think I ended up Googling African ayahuasca, because I thought, well, if there's a plant in South America that can help people, there's definitely going to be a plant in Africa. So I heard about iboga. But trying to get a iboga or even find an iboga practitioner just proved to be elusive for about 2 years. But in that time, I discovered this amazing world of psychedelics online. So all of these talks by people who I've now got to know, which is really kind of weird, because for a long time these people were my lifeline. You know, I was listening to Ros Watts, I was listening to Ben Sessa, I was listening to David Nutt, I was listening to all these people, and it was like they're talking about this thing that can cure my brain. I remember saying to my sister, she said to me, "Why are you looking for this thing called ayahuasca or this other thing called iboga? Why are you looking for it?" And I said to her, I feel like my brain's a computer that needs defragging. And I know that if I can find the right thing, I can make my brain deal with this situation that's going on. Because obviously all of this time, my son is disappearing more and more often. He's absolutely not listening. Everything that they tell you about how to bring up children is not working. And I'm trying to find, this African version of ayahuasca. But in the meantime, I came across Gabor Mate and Gordon Newfound and their book, Hold On to Your Kids. Brilliant, brilliant book, because that made me understand about attachment parenting. I started doing some of the things they recommended. So I was kind of rebuilding our connection, but I still wasn't reaching him. And that was really my big thing. Was I knew intuitively that I as a parent needed to change to deal with the new child that I now had, because he was no longer the child I used to have. During that time, I was really lucky, and I came across another book. When I started to realize that my son had so attached to these people, I remember just writing something and thinking, it's like he's in a cult. And then that led me to do some research, cults and gangs, what do they have in common? I found a few things, but I was lucky to find a book by a woman called Diane Bensota. And she had come out of the Moonies, who have a proper name, but I can't remember it. But she'd come out of that cult and then had worked as somebody who helped people come out of cults. And she just had so much good information on how to get somebody out of the cult. And I really realized that that's what I needed to be able to do. And all these other things weren't working. So I was really lucky. I was getting a lot of help from the police. I was getting a lot of help from social services. It was a time when they would have like these case conferences once a month. There'd be about 10 professionals around the table and me. And all these people were trying to help me, but nothing was working because my son was so adamant that he was going to be a drug dealer and he was going to be really successful at it. And the rest of us were poor and we didn't know anything about life, and he was the one who knew. So all these schemes that they have, teach people DJing, encourage children to play football. They weren't cutting it with my son. I was really lucky eventually with all of this kind of looking for things on YouTube and really working hard on repairing our relationship. I came across nonviolent communication. And that was really good because there's hours and hours and hours of training on nonviolent communication. So I absolutely learned that. So that helped with being able to communicate with my son. And I came across Byron Katie's The Work, which is a form of self-inquiry. And that was really good because that helped me see really what was my thoughts and what was I projecting and what was my son sometimes really saying. And that was super, super, super helpful. So I feel like I kind of had these tools in my bag, and I'm still looking for psychedelics, not able to find any. But then I found Kambo, frog medicine, which is a medicine that comes from the giant tree frog in the Amazon, and it's legal. So I was able to start having Kambo. They burn the top layer of skin, there's no blood, and this poison essentially is put on, and you drink 2 liters of water, and essentially all your organs force out anything that shouldn't be in there into the water, and it's a purgative, and you purge the water. What I learned later is if you read things like The Body Holds the Score and stuff, actually we store a lot of trauma in our organs. So for me, it made a massive difference because I started to worry less and I started to have better ideas about what to do. I was lucky enough to come across an amazing Iboga practitioner on the underground. And one of the ways in which they worked is that you actually had to have quite a lot of Kambo beforehand because Iboga can kill you. It is something that people have died of before. But by the time I got to her, I'd actually had 9 lots of Kambo. And so my system was very clean and I was able to have Iboga. And I always say that for me, it was like I always say I became this dragon mother, and I developed this spine, and I started getting amazing ideas about what to do. And also, I think it did something very interesting for me about time. I started being able to understand that there were things that I needed to do at that time that would help my son later. Even if he couldn't understand it, there would be a time where he would be grateful for the things that I'd done then. And that was really, and I don't know how that was communicated to me, but somehow I came out of the trip knowing that it was really important that my son see me absolutely trying everything to get him out of this situation. While also what I learned from Diane Benscoter, not criticizing what he was doing. So it was a very weird time. I would talk to him about what he was doing and how much drugs he'd sold. And then the next minute, he would see me chasing cars, taking photographs, giving information to the police. So we had this very interesting, surreal kind of relationship going on. But because of the tools that I'd learned from Hold On to Your Kids, I was able, and nonviolent communication especially, I was able to really keep him on the phone for long periods of time. Sometimes we'd be on the phone 6-7 hours a day while he would be out there doing what he was doing. And in all of that, I learned so much about people in coercive control situations. I knew that once my son was out of that situation, this was something that I really, really wanted to do, because I was finding it so hard to find books and resources that could help me deal with the fact that he was no longer, if you like, in his right mind. And the law was not, in a way, on our side. The medicine helped me to really be able to look at people who were in law enforcement and stuff, look at them differently. So the people that I came across who weren't for us, I left them. You know, they weren't the ones I was speaking to in the room. I would speak to the people who were really there to help us. And so it helped me build relationships with people where they really helped us, gave me information that they weren't even supposed to give to parents. And I just kind of learned on the job. Eventually, once I had Iboga and I knew how psychedelics worked. I was enmeshed enough in the culture to also then understand about psilocybin magic mushrooms, MDMA, and how it was used in relationships. And there was an amazing book by, it's actually not his name, he's an underground therapist called Psychedelic Psychotherapy, and his name's just gone from my head, but if you put it into Amazon, it comes out. And that book was brilliant because it actually gave a formula and a process to working with somebody who's suffering from PTSD with MDMA and with psilocybin, and he goes through his protocol. And I was able to use the same protocol with my son, and within 8 hours, he said he wasn't going to sell drugs anymore, and actually told me where the rest of the drugs were, and we were able to give that back to the people. And although I say the story and I say that was that, it was also then the start of another cycle, because actually in the years that he'd been groomed and he'd been doing all of this stuff, he'd completely lost his self-esteem, lost his confidence. I lost really the sense of who he was. I had a lot of guilt about being controlled for so long, and slowly started to re-indoctrinate himself, which was something that Diane Benscoter actually talks about with people who come out of cults, that people are quite surprised how quickly they go back into another cult, or people coming out of abusive relationships, how quickly they even go back to the old abuser or just replace the old abuser with a new abuser. And I would say in terms of with my son, really, so he's been out of everything for the last 3 years, but we're still very slowly, and, you know, he's a young man now, he's no longer a child, but we're still working together, especially now I'm back in Ghana, because he, luckily, and all praises to all of the medicines, because one of the things that came out of his psilocybin trip was that he needed to return to Ghana. So he bought his own ticket after lockdown, came to Ghana, and has been here for the last 3 years. So now I'm back in Ghana. We're actually about to start working together again, I suppose, on the rest of the healing journey. And so we're going to be using psilocybin and iboga, because iboga grows here. They're also growing ayahuasca and the capi vine here. There's somebody here I know who brews ayahuasca. So we're going to be talking. She arrives here in the next week or so. but I'm also here in Ghana to write a book about our experiences and about the work that all of this has led to me doing, which is on one half is working with parents who are going through all manner of things. Before, it used to be parents who were dealing with young people coming out of gangs, but now it's parents dealing with all sorts of things. And my sort of ethos process of working with parents is very often they want to present me with their young people, and sometimes it's grown up children, and they're always a little bit disappointed when I say I don't work with people who don't come to me. I work only with the ones who come to me. And so if a parent comes to me, it's really about us working together for them to become the new parent that their new child needs, because that's the experience that I found. That old Aquea could not deal with the new Seren. I had to become a new person. And thank goodness he is happy with the person that I became. And he's the one who keeps egging me on. Like at the moment, I'm supposed to be doing a counselling course, and he keeps saying, when are you starting it? When are you starting it? When are you starting the book? And it's like, bloody hell. I actually thought it might be a bit more challenging to start the book because I thought he might be upset that, you know, I was going to be writing about our business, but he doesn't seem to be upset, and is in fact really, really, really encouraging. And now we're at this new juncture because he's not in a gang. We're really working on something a bit different now, really kind of how to get him back to himself. And for me, that's where the spiritual stuff that I learned while I was going through everything, because for me, psychedelics came first and then spirituality came in. Before psychedelics, for me, I'm no longer a Christian person. That was me, because I grew up in a Christian household. My mother's sister was a very famous Christian healer. My brother is a healer, not a Christian one, but there's lots of people in the family with the gift of healing, but more from the Christian end of things. And for me, once I admitted that I was not Christian when I was about 14, which was basically I came out as not Christian, I've not had much to do with spirituality. But as I started working with the medicines, a whole spiritual world opened up. So as well as the medicines, as well as the other modalities, healing modalities, I also got my first ancestral altar. Now I have a whole bunch of processes that I do. I try to work in line with the phases of the moon in my normal life. I am now learning more and more and more about other healing plants, along with psychedelics, and learning how they communicate with people. And so, yes, this whole other world has completely opened up to me because of this one experience. So although I would never wish what we went through on anyone else, I am in a strange way grateful that it's something that my son and I went through, because I feel the next part of his life and the next part of his journey will also be something that can help a lot of people. So I don't know if there's any questions or if there's any more that you want me to elaborate on.
Guys, I'm going to join you now. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's not often you get to hear the perspective of a parent, which is really, really important for people to hear. When you hear about stories of grooming or coercive control, which we now know is widespread across the UK, I think when you get to hear a parent's perspective of what they've gone through, it can help people gather an idea of just the scenarios that parents are put in. So thank you so much for sharing it. And now your story with the book, which we've already got people asking as well, when's the book going to be ready? So you've got other people now who are desperate for the book to come out. So you're going to have people emailing you. But it's good. Sometimes you need to say you're going to do something, so it gives you the nudge. You'll have more people coming forward.
Yes.
And it will be really valuable. And it's type of book I hope that police officers will get to read, social workers will get to read, because that's how you can really get to try and change people. You know, that's what David Nutt hopes with his books. You know, we would try and get them at all different types of sectors. And it does have an impact. You know, looking back to Jocelyn's talk, a book can be a pivotal point in someone's life when they read it. And then from there, it can just trigger a series of events. So get that book out.
Absolutely.
We've got a great...
I will. I've got 4 months to write it.
We've got a great question. We've got multiple great questions from Rosie. So I'm going to start with the first one because I think it's easy just to read each question out. So firstly, it's how supportive has your family been with utilising psychedelics as a healing tool?
It's been so interesting because I think people in the family have been more supportive of psychedelics than they were of me coming out as not Christian, which actually really surprised me. And in a way, I feel like the medicine also did that work. I feel like for us as a family, once we were all on this road, because it was all of us, you know, it was my mother, it was my sister, it was my brother, my brothers, all these other people were all on there because we have a saying in Asante, my people, which is, if you sell your illness, you'll buy a cure. So when it happened, I didn't keep it in. I think one of the first things that happened, especially with the Cambo, was I started to lose the shame around what was going on. And I started telling people what was going on. And so everybody in our family knew. So once, I think after my first time of having Cambo, the next one, my sister and brother came. As soon as I discovered psilocybin magic mushrooms, I received a message from the mushrooms that my sister, who has, she's got a lung condition, so she's had pneumonia about 3 times, and so her lungs would fill with fluid. And the mushrooms told me that if she microdosed at night, the fluid would go down. She's 60 years old. She's never even had a cigarette before. She's been microdosing now for 2 years for her lungs. The mushrooms told me when my mother started this repetitive storytelling, they could go around about 5 times, and I recognized that, is this some kind of dementia type thing starting? The next time I tripped, it was almost like an advert came on, and it was like, your mother too has to microdose at night because it's about inflammation and it will remove inflammation in her brain. So mother was 77 at the time. She started microdosing at night. And I think it really affected her and helped her to deal with when she was given her cancer diagnosis last year. She dealt with the whole end of life thing so beautifully, and that it was really encouraging for all of our family and her friends and everything. And I think these medicines coming into our lives just really changed everybody in very, very different ways. And now I'm in Ghana. My nieces and nephews are waiting to also have their opportunities to start working with these medicines for a massive range of things. So it's been a boon really for our family, and I would never have guessed it. 8 years ago when I was leaving Ghana, I never, ever, ever would have guessed that I would be the one coming back to introduce psilocybin to people and people wanting to take it.
And I guess that boon's only going to keep growing the more that your family members are able to share their stories with each other, with each different condition. And, that really leads on nicely as well to a question here, which is, what do you think the importance of psychedelic advocacy is? And having that space to share personal stories like the story you've just shared with us is.
I think it's really important because I know that, when I would be watching all of these lectures for a long time in the beginning, and I was really obsessed with trying to find somebody talking about psychedelics from a parent's point of view, somebody talking about psychedelics and young people, but they weren't there. And in the end, I had to let go of not hearing the story of where I was. I had to listen to all these different people and pick out what was going to work for me. And I think for me, what it really taught me was radical self-responsibility. And the more I used the medicines, the more that I learned that you don't always have to see somebody who looks like you. You don't always have to hear somebody sounds like you. Actually, sometimes you just need to be able to see and hear, pick out the things that suit you and go off and do what you need to do. Because if you're waiting to see you, you may never see you. You may be the one who has to light the way. So I do find it important to keep talking about our story, so that people also know the breadth of things that these technologies can actually deal with. From my mum's early onset of dementia, from my sister and her pneumonia, all sorts of different things. These are not just mind medicines. That's what I'm discovering. And so I'm always happy to let people know that, go into your situation and see if this can help you.
Definitely. And again, with drug science, we really care about personal stories as well. We really believe in the power of sharing, because it will help people work out if there's going to be a potential approach that might work for them. And this kind of leads on to the next question as well. Slightly different from personal stories, but it's a really lovely message. I hope you've managed to see it whilst you've been chatting, from Olivia. It's your talk is exactly what I've needed to hear. Thank you. I'm currently a substance misuse worker for adolescents, and I work with young boys involved in country lines. The idea of it being a cult resonates so deeply. What advice would you have for a professional working in this field, trying to integrate the wisdom of the psychedelic experience into my practice whilst being up against a system that doesn't understand the mystical experience or a language to communicate this? Which is a great question. Again, personal stories play a role, but you've got an amazing experience. What can you tell a professional?
It's so difficult, and I'd love for her to reach out to me so we can talk some more, because I think I'd probably say what I say to parents. Use the medicines, take your questions to the medicines, because we just can't even guess the directions that they can help us go in. And I'm always desperate to speak to parents and professionals dealing with young people, because there's just hardly anything about the fact that they're in coercive control situations. And one of the reasons why all the other things that they're trying just don't work is the lack of acknowledgement that these people are being controlled by somebody else. Once that can be understood, then you know what to do. But at the moment, nobody wants to talk about that. I mean, once my son decided to return the drugs, I did tell the police and social services exactly what I'd done, kind of in the hope that I would be arrested and then it could be really big. But I think the medicines had another plan for me. And everybody just said, well, if he's back at home, brilliant. And that was the end of the conversation with all of these professionals. So, yeah, it didn't quite go the way that I wanted it to go. But really, I think the important thing is just for, if you're that way inclined, take your question to the medicine and you will be shown your own individual route But I'm happy to come and speak where she is to other professionals, share the books that helped me, because I think just even understanding the relationship between gangs and cults is probably the first step.
And again, there's another comment that's very similar to that from a clinical psychologist talking about their experience of working with a mother whose son is involved in county lines, and just the experience that they've witnessed, that coercive control. So again, any resources that can be shared would be great for some of these people. And you had so many great questions. I'm trying to pick your final one. And it's just one that I do want to cover because I know that you're interested in talking about this, and it's the overlap between African spirituality and psychedelics. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us on that topic as well?
The whole thing was so weird, because I remember there was one of my friends who said to me, I can't believe you're doing all this stuff running around and you haven't looked at a spiritual approach. And it floored me. And I thought, oh, okay, right, I know somebody, let me find out what I should do. But once I started having an ancestral altar, things started to change. And then I actually took my problems to, he's a hoodoo, which is a African diaspora form of voodoo, and he's a voodoo priest. And he went and did some stuff at the sea and told me what things to wash in and all of this stuff, and where to go and pour libation at the crossroads for a leg bath. And I remember pouring libation at the crossroads and him saying to me, when you go to the gods or the deities, you do not go as, woe is me, I'm a poor little human. You actually go as a sovereign living being. And so you ask with purpose and you ask with confidence as someone who's expected to get what they've asked for. So I remember going to the crossroads, and when I poured my libation, left my coins and my sweets, I said, I want my son brought home. I don't want him arrested ever with money or drugs on him. And after that series of pouring libation, he was arrested every weekend, 5 weekends in a row, and he never had any drugs. He never had any money on him. And I remember it really shook him because, as I said before, I always told him what I was doing. And even he got really kind of like, oh my God, what's going on? And that's the part that I found that the African spirituality did for me, because you have to go in with such confidence. I think you actually affect the field. You're asking all of these elements, you're asking nature, but you're asking with force. You believe it can be done and it will be done. And it's worked for me, for sure.
Oh, thank you so much. I really hope you got some time, because I'm going to bring up all the panelists again onto the screen, but I want you to have a read of some of the comments as well, just because there's so many people out there who've really benefited from this discussion. And I'm sure there's people not on the call as well, working within the space, working with children who are being groomed or under coercive control, who would really value from hearing your story. So thank you so much again. Welcome back onto the screen, Dasha, Joe, and Macy. And it's been such a fantastic evening. We've gone over the 2 hours, which is great. And it hasn't felt like 2 hours. It's absolutely flown by. Incredible to hear people's stories of how they've ended up with working within psychedelic medicine, all completely different, inspiring stories. And I really hope that everyone listening has found it an enjoyable evening, and it's given me loads of food for thought, and I'm really looking forward to going and talking about it with my housemates and telling them what I've heard and what I've learned. But I want to give everyone just a final opportunity, because there's lots of questions that came up in the chat. So we'll go around from start to finish. So with Macy first, actually, is there anything you'd like to add looking at the Q&A? Or anything that's come to mind that you'd like to share with people?
There's nothing really in particular I wanted to kind of backtrack and go over, but just again, thank you so much to all the speakers for making the time to be tonight and for also preparing as well. That's really, really great and thoughtful you've been able to do that. And thank you to everyone who's also been able to come and listen. I think it's really important to just create a space, especially for women, where we can really see the impact within the field that women can have, because often I find when looking into the world of psychedelics, it is like very male dominated, which is great, but to really have those reflections and inspirations to see yourself in that role is really, it's really important to have these kind of events. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone here this evening. It's been really.
Dasha, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I guess just to say, kind of in a similar vein, like it's super lovely to be on a panel surrounded by women who have all had such an important impact on the field of psychedelics. And I think especially for myself, being kind of early career scientist, being hidden in the lab most of my life, it's really nice actually to hear people talking about their own personal journeys and how, I guess, how psychedelics have helped them to sort of think in a new way, which like I guess is therapeutically what we think that they're doing. So it's nice to hear about how that's actually affecting people personally. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to the speakers as well. So it was really a privilege to hear everyone speak as well.
It's so important sometimes to hear the more personal stories behind people rather than just the graphs that you see at a conference. Definitely. And anything else you'd like to share, Kia? Anything about how people are going to find out about the book as well? Because that is we want to make sure people know how to find out.
Yeah, I'm on social media. I'm very active on Instagram. And I do check my LinkedIn, and because of the message that was left, I will be checking my LinkedIn a lot more often. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, and it's always my name, Aquea Offic. And I think my email is almost everywhere as well. So just contact me. Anything that you want to know, just contact me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Jo, anything else you'd like to share? I want you to remind everyone as well about the fantastic event tomorrow, the microdosing event as well.
Yes, and actually, Aquea, hearing you talking about the microdosing, that's perfect, because tomorrow we've got the experts talking about microdosing. That's another drug science event, 4:00 tomorrow. There's so many questions people have about microdosing, so that should be great. Yeah, I mean, what a brilliant event. Macy, you really knocked it out of the park, bringing such brilliant, inspirational women together with such sort of different perspectives and different stories, and having come to the psychedelic world, I suppose, in a different way. Yeah, it's just been very inspirational for me. I've absolutely loved it. So congratulations to you, Macy, for doing this and bringing such great women together. And I guess it just really emphasizes the need for psychedelic medicine, for this kind of approach, opening our minds, connected us to nature, the spirituality, that this is such an important approach, and we really need to kind of go back there. I think we really need to be embracing this. So, and Hannah, what a brilliant sharing.
Oh, learn from the best.
So hard.
I learn from you, Jo. So I think just finishing on how, it's joy. I feel it's been really heartwarming.
Yeah.
It's I work from home, and Drug Science, we're a small charity. So it's really nice to have events like this where you feel really connected again. So thank you so much, Macy, for organising, and Jo for being here, and all the speakers for giving up the time on your evening. I think it's been great to kickstart this Women in Psychedelics webinar series again. I think it kind of reiterates how important it is to have people's stories shared. So a massive thank you again. This will get eventually uploaded onto the Drug Science website and onto the YouTube channel. All of the previous ones are on the Drug Science YouTube channel. And if you search on the Drug Science website, you will be able to find them as well. The website's just having a bit of an update, so everything will be able to be found a bit easier in a few weeks' time. So once again, thank you for attending, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions at Drug Science. But I think that's it for now. A very, very big thank you again, everyone.